I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday morning when I heard the sound of a tow truck backing up into my driveway. And that was when I realized my life in the Evergreen Heights subdivision was about to become a legal nightmare. My name is Samuel Irving, and I had been living in this Montana community just outside Kalispell for 3 years. The house sat on a corner lot with mountain views that made every mortgage payment worth it. I worked remotely as a software engineer, which gave me the freedom to enjoy the outdoor lifestyle that drew me to Montana in the first place. One of those joys was my Polaris snowmobile, a machine I had saved for 2 winters to buy. It was not just a toy. It was my primary transportation during the brutal Montana winters when the mountain roads became impassable, and it was my lifeline to reach my elderly neighbor, Tom, who lived 3 properties down and needed regular check-ins. I bolted outside in my slippers, coffee mug still in hand. "Hey, what are you doing?" The tow truck driver, a weathered guy in his 50s with a Carhartt jacket, looked uncomfortable. "Got a call from your HOA. They said this vehicle is in violation of community standards and needs to be impounded." "That's insane. It's parked in my own driveway." I gestured at my snowmobile, which sat exactly where it always did, right next to my Ford F-150. He shrugged and handed me a clipboard. "Look, buddy, I just do what I'm told. The HOA paid for the impound. You got an issue, take it up with them. I'm just following the work order." "Who specifically called this in?" "Some lady named Brenda Patterson. She's listed as the HOA president." Of course it was Brenda. Brenda Patterson was the exact stereotype of an HOA Karren. A 52-year-old woman with an asymmetrical blonde haircut and reading glasses that she wore on a pearl chain. She had been president of the Evergreen Heights HOA for 6 years and treated the position like she was running a small dictatorship. Every interaction I had with her involved some complaint. My grass was a 1/4 inch too long. My Christmas lights stayed up 3 days past the January 5th deadline. My garbage bins were visible from the street on a non-collection day, but this was different. This was my property and that snowmobile was essential. "I need to call someone before you take that," I said. The driver checked his watch. "You got 5 minutes. After that, I have other jobs." I ran inside and grabbed my phone, pulling up the HOA documents I had stored digitally. I scanned through the covenants and restrictions, looking for anything about recreational vehicles. There it was, buried in Section 12, Subsection 4. No recreational vehicles, boats, or trailers shall be stored in driveways or visible from the street for more than 48 consecutive hours. My blood pressure spiked. I had read these documents when I bought the house, and I distinctly remembered this rule having an exception clause. I scrolled further and found it. Exception: vehicles necessary for medical access or emergency transportation during winter months may be exempted with board approval. I had never sought board approval because I assumed common sense would prevail. Montana winters were not a joke. When 3 feet of snow buried the roads and the plows had not made it to our subdivision yet, that snowmobile was how I got out. It was how I checked on Tom, who had a heart condition and lived alone. It was how I reached the main highway if there was an emergency. I called Brenda's number, which was listed on the HOA website. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Brenda. This is Samuel Irving from 428 Pinecrest Drive. There's a tow truck in my driveway about to impound my snowmobile. What is going on?" "Good morning, Samuel." Her voice had that saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. "The board met last night and determined that your continued violation of the recreational vehicle storage policy required immediate enforcement action. I use that snowmobile for emergency access. It's clearly outlined in the exceptions." The exception requires board approval, which you never obtained. Therefore, it doesn't apply. I'm applying right now then. Emergency approval. You know the roads are still bad from last week's storm. The board meets once a month. Our next meeting is February 18th. You can submit your request in writing and we'll review it then. That was 3 weeks away. Brenda, this is ridiculous. That snowmobile is essential transportation. Rules are rules, Samuel. If we make exceptions for you, we have to make them for everyone. The community elected me to maintain property values, and studies show that visible recreational vehicles decrease home values by up to 7%. Where are these studies? I don't have time to debate this. The impound fee is $450 plus $80 per day storage. You can retrieve your vehicle once you either remove it to an approved storage facility or receive board approval for the exception. Have a nice day. She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, rage building in my chest. I went back outside. The tow truck driver had already loaded my snowmobile onto the flatbed and was securing the straps. "Where are you taking it?" I asked. "Mountain Valley Impound on Highway 93. You'll need to pay the fees and provide authorization from the HOA to release it." I watched helplessly as my snowmobile disappeared down the street. This was not just about the money or the inconvenience. This was about the principle. Brenda Patterson had overstepped, and I was going to prove it. I spent the rest of the morning researching Montana HOA law and federal regulations. Something about this situation felt legally wrong, but I needed expert help. I called my friend Marcus, who worked as a paralegal in Missoula. "You need a real estate attorney who handles HOA disputes," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "I know a guy in Kalispell, Vincent Harper. He's sharp and he hates abusive HOAs. I'll text you his number." 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with Vincent Harper. His voice was deep and measured, with the confidence of someone who had handled these battles before. "So let me get this straight," Vincent said. "You use the snowmobile for winter access to check on an elderly neighbor and to reach the highway during storms when the subdivision roads are impassable." "Exactly. Tom is 3 houses down. He's 79 and lives alone. His kids are in Seattle. I promised them I'd check on him regularly, especially after heavy snow. Last February, he had chest pains and I used the snowmobile to get to him and call emergency services because cell service is spotty in our area and I needed to reach the highway to get a signal. And the HOA knew about this. I mentioned it at a community meeting last year. Brenda said it was nice that I helped Tom, but she didn't say anything about the snowmobile being a violation. Vincent was quiet for a moment. I could hear him typing. "Samuel, I think your HOA president may have made a serious mistake. There are federal laws that protect access rights, especially when it comes to emergency services and care for vulnerable individuals. Let me do some research, and I'll call you back within 2 hours. How much is this going to cost me? Initial consultation is free. If I take the case, my rate is $250 an hour, but HOA dispute cases often result in the HOA paying attorney fees if we win. Let me look into the specifics before we discuss fees." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since the tow truck showed up. While I waited for Vincent to call back, I walked down to Tom's house. The sidewalks were still covered with packed snow and ice from the storm 5 days earlier. It took me 20 minutes to walk what would have been a 3-minute snowmobile ride. Tom's driveway had not been shoveled, which worried me. I knocked on his door. Tom answered wearing a flannel robe and slippers. He was a thin man with white hair and gentle blue eyes. "Samuel, come in, come in. It's freezing out there." "How are you doing, Tom?" "I noticed your driveway isn't cleared." Oh, the kid who usually does it called and said he couldn't make it out this week. Some family emergency. I've just been staying inside. I have enough food. Are you feeling okay? Any chest pains or dizziness? I'm fine, son. A little stir-crazy, but fine. He gestured for me to sit. What brings you by? Usually you come on that snowmobile of yours. I explained what happened with Brenda and the HOA. Tom's expression shifted from confusion to anger. That woman is a menace, he said. She sent me a violation notice last month because my gutter had a small dent in it. Wanted me to replace the whole thing for $3,000. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford that. Did you replace it? Not yet. I'm trying to figure out if I can contest it. But Samuel, you need that snowmobile. What if I have another incident like last year? You saved my life. That's exactly what I told her, but she doesn't care. I've got a lawyer looking into it. Good, you fight this. Brenda thinks she owns this whole neighborhood. I stayed with Tom for another hour, making sure he had everything he needed. Before I left, I shoveled his driveway and walkway. By the time I got back to my house, my phone was ringing. It was Vincent. Samuel, I've been digging into your situation and I think we have a strong case. Very strong. My pulse quickened. What did you find? 3 things, actually, all at the federal level. First, there's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, you personally may not have a disability, but Tom does. His heart condition qualifies, and you've been providing him with what's called informal support services. By impounding your snowmobile, the HOA is interfering with his access to necessary care and support, which could be a violation of Title Roman III of the ADA, which applies to HOAs as places of public accommodation in their common areas and potentially their enforcement actions. Okay, that's one. Second, there's the Fair Housing Act. This is a big one. The FHA requires HOAs to make reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. Tom's disability requires that he have access to emergency support during winter months. Your snowmobile is the reasonable accommodation that enables that access. By removing it, the HOA is denying a reasonable accommodation, which is a direct violation of the FHA. And the third, this one is more complex, but potentially the most powerful. There's a federal statute, 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, which provides a civil action for deprivation of rights under color of state law. HOA, when they enforce restrictive covenants, can be considered state actors in certain contexts because they're exercising powers typically reserved for governments. By depriving you of your property without due process and interfering with your ability to provide emergency services, they may have violated your constitutional rights. I sat down heavily on my couch. So, what do? We send them a legal demand letter outlining these violations and demanding immediate return of your snowmobile, reimbursement of all impound fees, and a formal exception to the RV storage policy. We also demand they cease all retaliation and threatening conduct. If they don't comply within 5 business days, we file a federal lawsuit. How much will this cost? Here's the beautiful part. If we win, and I think we will, the HOA pays your attorney fees under the Fair Housing Act's fee-shifting provision. That means you won't pay a dime. I'll work on contingency for the federal claims. You only pay me if we lose, and I don't think we will. When can you start? I'm drafting the demand letter now. I'll have it to you for review by 5 o'clock today, and we'll send it certified mail tomorrow morning. I'll also email it to Brenda Patterson and the HOA board. Do it. Vincent chuckled. I was hoping you'd say that. Samuel, I've been handling HOA cases for 15 years, and this is one of the most clear-cut violations I've seen. Brenda Patterson is about to learn a very expensive lesson about federal law. After we hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was not just fighting for my snowmobile anymore. I was fighting for Tom, for every homeowner who had been bullied by an overzealous HOA board, and for the principle that people's rights mattered more than arbitrary rules. The demand letter arrived in my inbox at 4:30 that afternoon. It was 10 pages of densely worded legal analysis, citing case law and federal statutes. Vincent had laid out each violation in excruciating detail. The letter demanded the immediate return of the snowmobile, reimbursement of the $450 impound fee, plus any storage charges, a formal written exception to the RV storage policy for emergency access purposes, and a commitment that the HOA would not retaliate against me for asserting my legal rights. The final paragraph was particularly satisfying. Should the Evergreen Heights HOA fail to comply with these demands within 5 business days, we will file a federal lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, seeking compensatory damages, punitive damages, injunctive relief, and attorney fees. We are confident that the federal court will find the HOA's actions constitute willful discrimination and violation of civil rights, which may result in damages exceeding $100,000 plus attorney fees. I approved the letter, and Vincent sent it out first thing Wednesday morning, both by certified mail and email. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. Samuel Irving. This is Margaret Chen. I'm on the HOA board with Brenda. Margaret was one of the 3 other board members. I had met her a few times at community events. She seemed reasonable, unlike Brenda. Hi, Margaret. I just got a copy of the legal demand letter your attorney sent. Samuel. I had no idea about the situation with Tom or the emergency access issue. Brenda told us at the meeting that you were just storing a recreational vehicle in violation of the rules. She didn't mention any of this other context. She knew. I told her on the phone yesterday morning. Margaret sighed. I believe you. Look, I'm going to be honest. Brenda runs these meetings like she's the only one who matters. She pushed through the impound decision without giving us all the facts. If I had known you were using the snowmobile to help Tom, I would have voted against enforcement. Can you override her decision? That's complicated. We'd need an emergency board meeting, and Brenda controls the meeting schedule, but I'm going to try. I'll call the other 2 board members, David and Patricia, and see if we can force an emergency session. This lawsuit threat is serious, and if what your attorney says is true, we could be exposing the entire HOA to massive liability. It's all true, Margaret, every word. Then we need to fix this before it goes to court. Give me 48 hours. She hung up, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe cooler heads would prevail. Thursday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. This time it was Brenda. Samuel, we need to talk about this ridiculous legal threat. Her voice had lost all its fake sweetness. She was angry. There's nothing ridiculous about it. Your actions violated federal law. That's absurd. We enforce our covenants the same way every HOA in America does. You're just upset because you don't like following rules. Brenda, you impounded a vehicle that I used to provide emergency services to a disabled elderly man. That's a violation of the Fair Housing Act and the ADA. My attorney laid it all out in the letter. Your attorney is bluffing. HOAs have the right to enforce their covenants. That's established law. Not when it violates federal disability rights statutes. You didn't do your homework. Listen to me very carefully, Samuel. If you pursue this lawsuit, I will make your life in this community a living hell. Every single violation, Every blade of grass that's too long, every tiny infraction, I will document and fine you. I will make you wish you had never moved here. Did you just threaten retaliation? Because my attorney specifically warned against that in the demand letter. That's another federal violation. There was silence on the line. Then Brenda said in a tight voice, "This conversation is over. You'll be hearing from the board." She hung up. I immediately called Vincent and told him about the conversation. "Perfect," Vincent said. "Can you write down everything she said, as close to word for word as you can remember, and email it to me? That threat of retaliation is Exhibit A in our federal case. She just handed us more ammunition." I spent 20 minutes documenting the conversation and sent it to Vincent. An hour later, he called me back. "I just sent an amended demand letter to the board, copying all 4 members individually. I included your documentation of Brenda's retaliatory threats and added a section on retaliation as an additional violation. I also informed them that any further threats or adverse actions will be considered part of the ongoing civil rights violation." Do you think Margaret can get the board to override Brenda? I don't know, but the threat of a federal lawsuit might motivate them. HOA boards have a fiduciary duty to the homeowners. If 3 board members realize that Brenda's actions are exposing the entire community to 6-figure liability, they may act. Friday afternoon, I got an email from Margaret. "Emergency board meeting scheduled for tonight at 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. You're invited to attend and present your case. Brenda is not happy, but David, Patricia, and I outvoted her." I forwarded the email to Vincent. "I'll be there," he replied. "This should be interesting." The Evergreen Heights Clubhouse was a modest building near the subdivision entrance, with a meeting room that held about 30 people. When Vincent and I arrived at 6:45, Margaret, David, and Patricia were already there. David was a retired accountant in his 60s, tall and thin with wire-rimmed glasses. Patricia was a middle-aged woman who worked as a nurse practitioner. Both looked stressed. Brenda arrived exactly at 7, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. She glared at me as she took her seat at the board table. "Let's get this started," Margaret said. "We're here because of the legal demand Samuel's attorney sent regarding the impound of his snowmobile. Vincent, you're representing Samuel." Vincent stood. He was a tall black man in his 40s with close cropped hair and a commanding presence. "Yes, thank you for agreeing to meet. I think once we walk through the facts and the law, it will be clear that the HOA's actions violated federal statutes and that immediate remediation is necessary." Brenda cut in. "This is a waste of time. We enforced our covenants exactly as written. Samuel never applied for an exception. Miss Patterson, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish." Vincent's tone was polite but firm. "As outlined in my demand letter, there are 3 federal law violations at play here. First, the Fair Housing Act requires HOAs to make reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. Tom Hendricks, who lives at 446 Pinecrest Drive, has a documented heart condition. Samuel provides informal support services to Mr. Hendricks, particularly during winter months when road conditions make traditional vehicle access difficult or impossible. Samuel's snowmobile is the primary means by which he provides this support, including emergency response services. Last year, Samuel used his snowmobile to reach Mr. Hendricks during a cardiac episode and to summon emergency services. By impounding the snowmobile, the HOA has denied a reasonable accommodation necessary for Mr. Hendricks to safely remain in his home. Patricia spoke up. "I wasn't aware of any of this. Brenda, did you know about Tom?" Samuel never submitted formal documentation of any disability or requested an accommodation, Brenda said stiffly. The Fair Housing Act doesn't require formal documentation before an accommodation is reasonable, Vincent said. The HOA's own bylaws provide an exception for vehicles necessary for medical access. That exception exists precisely for situations like this. Samuel's use of the snowmobile falls squarely within the purpose of that exception. David leaned forward. What are the other two violations? Second is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title Roman III prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in places of public accommodation. While HOAs are a gray area under Title Roman III, there's increasing case law suggesting that HOA enforcement actions that interfere with disability access may fall under ADA protections. Third, and most seriously, is 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, which provides civil remedy for deprivation of constitutional rights under color of state law. HOA, when enforcing restrictive covenants through impoundment or other enforcement actions, may be considered state actors. By depriving Samuel of his property without due process and interfering with his ability to provide emergency services, the HOA may have violated his constitutional rights to property and due process. The room was silent. Margaret looked at Brenda. Did you consult an attorney before you ordered the impound? We don't need an attorney to enforce our own rules, Brenda snapped. Actually, you do when federal law is implicated, Vincent said. And there's one more issue we need to address. On Thursday, Miss Patterson called Samuel and explicitly threatened retaliation if he pursued legal action. She stated, and I quote from Samuel's contemporaneous notes, "If you pursue this lawsuit, I will make your life in this community a living hell. Every single violation, every blade of grass that's too long, every tiny infraction, I will document and fine you. Retaliation for asserting rights under the Fair Housing Act is itself a federal violation, with additional penalties." Patricia turned to Brenda, her face flushed. "Brenda, is that true? Did you say that?" I was frustrated. "He's threatening to sue us." "That's not a denial," Margaret said quietly. "Brenda, you may have exposed this entire HOA to massive liability." "This is overblown," Brenda insisted. "No court is going to side with him over a snowmobile." Vincent opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "I've brought copies of 3 federal cases, all within the last 5 years, where HOAs were found liable under the Fair Housing Act for denying reasonable accommodations. In 2 of those cases, the damages exceeded $200,000 plus attorney fees. In one case, the HOA president was personally liable for willful discrimination. I'd be happy to leave these for your review." He placed the documents on the table. David picked them up and started reading. His face went pale. "How much are you asking for in damages if this goes to court?" Patricia asked. "Compensatory damages for the emotional distress and inconvenience caused by the violation, punitive damages for willful discrimination and retaliation, injunctive relief requiring policy changes, and attorney fees. Conservatively, we'd be seeking $250,000. If the court finds the violations were willful and egregious, which the retaliation suggests, it could be substantially more." Margaret stood up. "I've heard enough. I move that we immediately authorize the return of Samuel's snowmobile, reimburse all impound and storage fees, grant a formal written exception to the RV storage policy for emergency access purposes, and issue a written apology." "I second," Patricia said immediately. Brenda's face was bright red. "You can't just capitulate to threats." "We're not capitulating. We're fixing a mistake before it costs every homeowner in this subdivision thousands of dollars in legal fees and damages. This is our fiduciary duty. All in favor? Margaret, Patricia, and David raised their hands. Motion carries, Margaret said. Vincent, can you draft a settlement agreement outlining these terms? I can have it to you by Monday morning. Good. Brenda, I need you to call the impound lot first thing tomorrow and authorize the release of Samuel's snowmobile. We'll reimburse him for all fees. Brenda stood up abruptly, grabbed her portfolio, and walked out without a word. The door slammed behind her. David rubbed his face. We need to talk about removing her as president. That's a conversation for another meeting, Margaret said. Right now, let's make sure we fix this situation. Samuel, I apologize on behalf of the board. This should never have happened. I nodded, feeling vindicated but also exhausted. I appreciate that. I just want to be able to help Tom and live my life without harassment. You will, Patricia said. And we'll make sure the written exception is clear so this never happens again. Vincent and I left the clubhouse around 8:30. In the parking lot, he shook my hand. Well done. Most HOA cases don't resolve this quickly. What happens with Brenda? That's up to the board. But she's lost credibility, and she exposed them to serious liability. I wouldn't be surprised if they remove her. In the meantime, I'll draft a settlement agreement that includes a non-retaliation clause and protections for Tom. We'll make sure this is airtight. The next morning, Saturday, I got a call from the impound lot. Mr. Irving, we got authorization from your HOA to release your snowmobile. You can pick it up anytime today. There's no balance owed. I drove out to Mountain Valley Impound, a fenced lot off Highway 93. The clerk had me sign a release form, and 20 minutes later, I was driving home with my snowmobile on a trailer behind my truck. It felt like a massive weight had been lifted. Sunday, I took the snowmobile over to Tom's house. He was in his garage organizing tools. Tom, good news. I explained everything that happened with the board meeting. Tom's eyes watered. Samuel, I can't thank you enough. You didn't have to fight that battle. Yes, I did. What Brenda did was wrong and it could have put you at risk. That's not okay. Well, I'm grateful. And I'm glad those other board members had some sense. Monday morning, Vincent emailed me the settlement agreement. It was comprehensive, outlining the return of the snowmobile with all fees reimbursed, a formal written exception to the RV storage policy specifically for my snowmobile when used for emergency access and support services, a written apology from the board, and a clause prohibiting any retaliation or adverse action against me related to this dispute. The agreement also required the HOA to adopt a formal reasonable accommodation policy consistent with the Fair Housing Act. I signed it and sent it back to Vincent. By Wednesday, all 4 board members had signed. Margaret emailed me a copy with a personal note. Again, our apologies. This should not have happened. We're working on ensuring it never happens again. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Tom. Samuel, you need to see this. I walked down to his house. He handed me a letter on HOA letterhead. It was a notice of violation, dated the day before the board meeting, demanding that Tom replace his damaged gutter within 30 days or face daily fines of $50. She sent this before the meeting, Tom said. She's retaliating against me now. I took a photo of the letter and texted it to Vincent. He called me 5 minutes later. This is bad for Brenda. The settlement agreement isn't even fully executed yet, and she's already engaging in what appears to be retaliatory conduct against a disabled homeowner associated with you. This is exactly the kind of behavior that results in personal liability. What should we do? Forward the letter to Margaret, David, and Patricia. Let them handle it internally first. If they don't, we'll file a motion to enforce the settlement and add this as evidence of ongoing retaliation. I emailed the 3 board members. Margaret called me within the hour. Samuel, I am so sorry. This is unacceptable. We're calling another emergency meeting tonight to address this. Can you and Tom both attend? We'll be there. That night the clubhouse was tense. Brenda sat at the board table, her arms crossed. Tom came with me, walking slowly with his cane. Vincent sat in the back, observing. Margaret called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss a violation notice that was sent to Tom Hendricks regarding his gutter. Tom, would you like to explain the situation? Tom held up the letter. I got this notice dated last Wednesday, the day of your meeting about Samuel's snowmobile. It demands I replace my gutter for $3,000 within 30 days. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford that. The gutter has a small dent, but it's functional. This feels like harassment. Margaret turned to Brenda. Did you send this notice? It's a legitimate violation. The covenants require that all exterior components be maintained in good repair. The timing is suspicious, Brenda. This looks like retaliation. Tom's gutter has been damaged for months. I've been documenting it. Vincent stood up. May I speak? Margaret nodded. Please. This is textbook retaliation under the Fair Housing Act. Mr. Hendricks is a disabled individual who benefits from Samuel's reasonable accommodation, which the HOA initially denied. Now, days after we reached a settlement, Mr. Hendricks receives a violation notice for a minor cosmetic issue that's been present for months without enforcement. The timing, the severity of the demand, and the financial burden all suggest retaliatory intent. If this matter proceeds to court, the HOA will face additional liability for retaliation, and Miss Patterson may face personal liability. Patricia spoke up. I move that we rescind the violation notice sent to Tom Hendricks and adopt a policy that all future violation notices must be approved by a majority of the board before being sent, not just the president. Second, David said. All in favor? Margaret asked. 3 hands went up. Brenda's did not. Motion carries. Tom, the violation notice is rescinded. We apologize for the inconvenience and distress this caused. Tom nodded, visibly relieved. Margaret turned to Brenda. We need to talk about your role as president. You've acted unilaterally multiple times, exposed the HOA to federal liability, and engaged in what appears to be retaliatory conduct. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. Brenda stood up, her face scarlet. You can't do this. I've been president for 6 years. I've maintained property values and enforced standards. You've also violated federal law and put every homeowner at risk, David said quietly. It's time for new leadership. I move that Brenda Patterson be removed as president of the Evergreen Heights HOA board, effective immediately, Margaret said. Second, Patricia said. All in favor? 3 hands went up. Opposed? Brenda raised her hand alone. The motion carries 3-1. Brenda, you're removed as president. You remain on the board as a general member, but you no longer have unilateral authority to issue violation notices or make enforcement decisions. Brenda grabbed her things and stormed out for the second time. The door slammed so hard the frame shook. After the meeting, Tom shook Vincent's hand. Thank you. I was terrified I'd lose my home over that gutter. You were never at risk, Vincent said. The Fair Housing Act protects you, but I'm glad the board saw sense. Over the following weeks, things settled down. Margaret was elected as the new president. The board adopted new policies requiring majority approval for all enforcement actions and created a formal reasonable accommodation process consistent with federal law. Brenda remained on the board but rarely attended meetings. I thought the matter was closed until mid-March when Vincent called me with unexpected news. "Samuel, I got a call from a reporter at the Flathead Beacon. They're doing a story on HOA abuses in Montana, and someone tipped them off about your case. Are you willing to talk to them?" What would I say? Just tell your story. The more people know about these issues, the more likely we'll see legislative reform. Right now, HOAs in Montana operate with very little oversight. Your case highlights how federal law can protect homeowners, but most people don't know their rights. I agreed to the interview. The reporter, a woman named Jessica Torres, came to my house and spent 2 hours talking to me, Tom, and Vincent. She was thorough, asking about every detail of the dispute and the legal issues involved. The article ran the first week of April. It was titled, "When HOAs Violate Federal Law, a Montana Homeowner's Battle Against Overreach." The piece detailed my situation, explained the Fair Housing Act and ADA violations, and included interviews with legal experts about HOA reform. It was shared widely on social media, and I got emails from dozens of homeowners across Montana dealing with similar issues. One email stood out. It was from a woman named Victoria Lewis in Bozeman. "Your story could have been mine," she wrote. "My HOA is trying to force me to remove a wheelchair ramp from my front entrance. They say it violates the aesthetic standards. I didn't know I had rights under the Fair Housing Act. Can you put me in touch with your attorney?" I forwarded her email to Vincent, and he took her case. Within a month, her HOA backed down and allowed the ramp. The publicity had another unexpected consequence. In late April, I got a call from a state legislator, Representative Karren Holloway, who represented a district near Kalispell. "Mr. Irving, I read the article about your case, and it concerns me greatly. I'm drafting legislation to increase oversight of HOAs in Montana and ensure homeowners have clear paths to challenge unfair enforcement actions. I'd like to use your case as an example when I present the bill. Would you be willing to testify at a committee hearing?" "Absolutely," I said. In May, I drove to Helena and testified before the House Judiciary Committee. I told them about the Snowmobile impound, the federal law violations, and the retaliation Tom experienced. I explained how most homeowners don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against abusive HOAs, and how clear state-level protections could prevent these situations. The bill, House Bill 427, passed the committee and eventually the full legislature. It required HOAs to provide notice and an opportunity to be heard before any enforcement action, created a state ombudsman to handle HOA complaints, and mandated that HOAs adopt reasonable accommodation policies consistent with federal law. The governor signed it in June. Back in Evergreen Heights, life returned to normal. Margaret proved to be a fair and reasonable HOA president. The board adopted a more collaborative approach, focusing on actual issues rather than petty rule enforcement. Brenda attended one more meeting after her removal as president, then resigned from the board entirely. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were selling their house and moving to Arizona. Tom's health remained stable through the spring, and I continued to check on him regularly. The snowmobile stayed in my driveway, and nobody said a word about it. One Saturday morning in early June, Tom invited me over for coffee. We sat on his back deck, looking at the mountains. "You know, Samuel, I've lived in this house for 20 years. I moved here after my wife died because I wanted peace and quiet. For the most part, I've had it. But these last few years with Brenda running the HOA, it felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time. Worried about every little thing, that's no way to live. I know what you mean. What you did fighting back, that took courage, and it didn't just help you and me, it helped a lot of people. I shrugged. I just didn't want to let her get away with it. That's exactly the right attitude. Too many people just accept it when someone with a little bit of power abuses it. You stood up. That matters. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking our coffee and watching a hawk circle over the ridge. Later that day, Vincent called. I wanted to give you an update. Remember I told you the HOA would reimburse your attorney fees as part of the settlement? Yeah. Well, the board just cut me a check for $12,000. That's my full fee for the case, which means you don't owe me anything. Vincent, that's incredible. Thank you. Thank me. You're the one who stood up for your rights. I just pointed out the law. But there's something else. Margaret called me yesterday. The board is considering hiring me as their general counsel to review all enforcement actions before they're taken, to make sure they're complying with federal law. If they do, your case will have fundamentally changed how that HOA operates. That would be amazing. It would. And Samuel, I've gotten 6 new clients in the last month, all from that article. People are starting to understand they don't have to tolerate HOA abuse. You started something. After we hung up, I sat on my own deck and reflected on the last few months. It had been stressful and frustrating, but ultimately worth it. I had learned that standing up for what's right often requires going through uncomfortable confrontations and legal battles. But the alternative, accepting injustice, was worse. My snowmobile sat in the driveway, ready for the next Montana winter. It was more than just a machine now. It was a symbol of what happens when someone decides to fight back against petty tyranny and arbitrary rules. Tom was safe. The HOA had new leadership. State law had changed to protect other homeowners. And Brenda Patterson had learned that being an HOA president doesn't put you above federal law. The mountains in the distance were still capped with snow, glowing pink in the evening light. Montana was a place where people valued freedom and self-reliance. It was fitting that this battle had played out here, in a place where those values still meant something. I thought about all the homeowners across the country dealing with similar situations, facing down petty HOA boards and wondering if they had any recourse. My case proved that they did. Federal law protected the vulnerable and limited the power of those who would abuse their authority. But you had to know your rights and be willing to assert them. The following week, Margaret stopped by my house. Samuel, I wanted to thank you personally. What happened with Brenda was a wake-up call for all of us. We've made a lot of changes to how the board operates, and I think the community is better for it. I appreciate that, Margaret. You didn't have to side with me at that first emergency meeting. Yes, I did. It was the right thing to do. And honestly, I had been uncomfortable with how Brenda ran things for a while. Your situation just forced the issue. She paused. There's something else. The board wants to formally recognize your assistance to Tom. We're creating a community service award in your name, recognizing homeowners who go above and beyond to help their neighbors. You'll be the first recipient. That's really not necessary. Maybe not, but we want to do it. You exemplified what community is supposed to be about, looking out for each other, especially the vulnerable. That's worth celebrating. The award ceremony was held at the clubhouse in late June. About 50 neighbors attended. Margaret gave a speech about the importance of community and helping others. Tom spoke about how my help had allowed him to stay in his home safely. Then they presented me with a plaque that read, Evergreen Heights Community Service Award, presented to Samuel Irving, for exemplary service and dedication to neighbors in need. It was touching, but the real reward was knowing that Tom was safe, that other homeowners now had protections, and that Brenda could no longer terrorize people with impunity. That summer was peaceful. I worked remotely, took my snowmobile out on the mountain trails on weekends, and checked on Tom regularly. The HOA stayed out of my way, and I stayed out of theirs. In August, Vincent called with one final update. I wanted you to know that the Montana Attorney General's office has opened an investigation into several HOAs across the state based on complaints they've received since your case went public. Your situation highlighted a pattern of federal law violations that they can no longer ignore. There may be additional enforcement actions coming. Good, I said. Maybe it will make HOA boards think twice before they abuse their power. That's the hope. And Samuel, thank you for being willing to stand up and fight. A lot of lawyers can cite the law, but it doesn't mean anything unless someone is brave enough to assert their rights. You did that. As summer turned to fall, I reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. A simple snowmobile impound had turned into a federal civil rights case, a legislative reform effort, and a shift in how HOAs operated across Montana. It had started with Brenda Patterson's arrogance and overreach, but it had ended with meaningful change. The first snow fell in October, dusting the mountains white. I checked my snowmobile, making sure it was ready for winter. Tom called that afternoon. You see the snow, Samuel? I did. Looks like winter's coming early this year. Good thing you've got your snowmobile. I'll sleep easier knowing you can get to me if something happens. Always, Tom. That's what neighbors do. And that, in the end, was what the whole fight had been about. Not rules or regulations or HOA authority. It was about looking out for people who needed help, and not letting anyone prevent you from doing what was right. Brenda had tried to impose her will through arbitrary enforcement of petty rules. She had forgotten that laws exist to protect people, not to give small-minded bureaucrats power over their neighbors. Federal law had reminded her of that fact, and she had paid the price for her arrogance. My snowmobile sat in the driveway, visible from the street, exactly where it had always been. But now it was there with the full protection of federal law and a written exception from the HOA board. Nobody would touch it again. I thought about all the battles still being fought across America in subdivisions and planned communities where HOA boards wielded unchecked power. My case wouldn't solve all those problems, but it had shown that resistance was possible, and that federal law could be a powerful tool against HOA overreach. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple. I stood on my deck, coffee in hand, looking at the wilderness beyond the subdivision. Montana was a good place to make a stand for what was right. Brenda Patterson had learned that being an HOA Karren came with consequences when you broke federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and constitutional due process rights were not suggestions. They were the law of the land, and they trumped any HOA covenant or restriction. My lawyer had found 3 federal law violations in Brenda's actions, and those violations had cost her the HOA presidency, damaged her reputation, and changed state law. It was a reminder that even small-time tyrants could be held accountable if someone was willing to fight. As winter approached, I was ready. Ready for the snow, ready to help Tom, and ready to defend my rights if anyone ever tried to take them again. The snowmobile in my driveway was not just transportation. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what was right, even when it meant going up against bureaucrats who thought they were untouchable. Brenda Patterson had gotten my snowmobile impounded, but my lawyer had found she broke 3 federal access laws. In the end, justice had prevailed, and the community was better for it.